Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on co-creation and corporate philanthropy, key ingredients for impact. First, I want to thank you all for joining, particularly in midst of the current coronavirus pandemic. We hope you and your family are staying safe. So before we begin, and as we let some people more people trickle in, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. So all of the attendees' lines will be on mute. Throughout the presentation, feel free to submit questions or comments into the chat box. There will be a question and answer at the end of the presentation, and we'll go ahead and cover those then. We do plan on recording today's session and having the slides available to you after the presentation. After we're all complete today, a short survey will pop up after the webinar, and we look forward to getting your feedback. So today's session will be led by my colleagues and I. This is Brittany Craig speaking, and I'm a Senior Director at Global Impact. I'm joined by Doug Balfour, Senior Advisor to Global Impact, and Amanda Meyer, Director at Global Impact. Achieving sustainable and scalable solutions to bring positive social innovation into the world is a shared goal of Global Impact and many of our clients. So in this next hour, we're going to have a discussion on co-creation and how it can support this goal. Doug is going to kick us off with exploring and defining co-creation, and then present an example of a client that used this process. Amanda will then share how co-creation is used to building a program and explore essential considerations. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we'll close with a question and answer.
Thanks, Brittany. This is Amanda speaking now. Hi, everybody. Before we dive into our session today, I'm going to share a bit on Global Impact so everybody has some context about who we are and how our expertise positions us to present on CSR and co-creation in the first place. We are a nonprofit consulting firm that partners with corporations and nonprofits to advance their philanthropic goals. I point out the fact that we're a nonprofit because we are unique from some other big box, larger consulting firms, in that the goals of our clients are always going to fit inside our own organizational mission and purpose. And that really makes for fruitful collaborative projects with our clients. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that our numbers aren't big. As you can see here, we've been doing this work for over 60 years, and we've raised nearly $2 billion for causes around the world. Also, for corporations, our charitable status allows us to support you both as an advisor or an intermediary, and we actually often have corporate initiatives housed here at Global Impact. And that brings me to our next slide. And you can see here we meet companies where they are at in their philanthropic journey, which typically sits inside one or more of these 4 areas. We have staff around the world designing and deploying strategies, and we even offer tech and finance solutions that are often crucial for success. Okay, so now we're going to get into why we're all here, co-creation.
So, really good to be with you. My name's Doug, and pleased to be with you talking about this topic of co-creation, which I've written quite a little bit on and been very interested in. Just a quick introduction. So about a decade ago, the term co-creation started to emerge within a business context of involving typically your customers into the process of conception to design to implementation, as this IBM quote sort of indicates. And then over the last year or 2 years, the philanthropic sector has been starting to sort of take on this co-creation concept. We define it as an iterative, equitable process that removes barriers for all actors to try and contribute their knowledge and resources to achieve good things, basically, around the world. So there's been a lot of evidence with this virus pandemic of kind of like co-creation either happening or not. I'm sure you can think of those type of examples. In order that we start thinking about what does co-creation mean and when to use it, we came up with 7 must-haves that we start to actually think about in terms of co-creation. So that could be co-creation internally within your organization, with your employees. It also could be externally with other organizations, with your programming, with charities, and their co-creation with implementing organizations and governments. So clarity. The first thing in any initiative is that of clarity. There's no point co-creating things which you can actually just do on your own. So choosing to work with others needs some sort of big, hairy, audacious goal, and trying to work on making it worthwhile. So clear objectives, agreeing on what shared success would look like, and answering the question, are we willing to pay that price? Because a diversity of actors, the second point, turns around and says, okay, so it may actually cost us to actually work with others that are different, but the difference may be what we actually need, because they're going to bring a capability or a capacity that we don't have. But essentially, in working with others, that typically means that you've got to lose some sort of control. So that gets us to humility, which isn't a word you normally see on business slides, but the humility of players. When you're attempting to do something bigger than any one of you, then almost by definition, no one is going to be the single star of this. And typically what often gets us into difficulties in the philanthropic sector is this question of who gets the credit. Over time, that may actually change. So the organization or the person that is sort of the focal point at the beginning may not be at the end, but essentially we have to be really sensitive around making sure we share that credit, which gets us into sort of history of track record. And that's the sort of look before you leap sort of comment. Looking at your own history as an organization in terms of your own internal capacity and experience to work with others. But then also being wise about looking at the people that you might be working with and evaluating their track record of being able to actually manage something like that, link arms with others. Integrity, that's getting into this issue of, do you play well with other people? And do you think that they're going to play well with you? There's so many examples of impact and projects that get launched and with great fanfare, and then basically they fall apart because either a particular individual or an organization is very difficult to work with, and everybody basically sort of pulls out when they have an opportunity. Recognizing that co-creation needs flexibility. It's often open-ended. The goals get redefined along the way. Some people bow out. There's often changes in personnel. There could be new leadership coming into your organization or one of the others, or internally. And co-creation by itself is inherently a fragile ecosystem that needs flexibility, and it needs looking after. And the final one is methodology. So that's in the context of methodology of co-creation. So, first of all, is the timing right to do this? Is it right internally? Is it right externally with your stakeholders? And also starting to think about, well, we really probably need a champion within the organization. And that champion, whatever their role, needs to be somebody that essentially is pretty much a diplomat, because they're going to live in the tension of multiple actors that all have slightly different objectives. And he or she needs to build that group of internal enthusiasts for this to work through. So then we came up with sort of 4 crucial questions, and you'll be able to sort of dig into this more if this is of interest in a series of blogs that I've written that we're going to give you links to at the end. So the first one, are we really clear about the goal? So that's coming down to, can we really do this ourselves? Is this just about actually scaling up what we've done before? Or is this something that is fundamentally different and we don't have all the pieces. We don't actually have necessarily the experience. Are we just giving lip service to co-creating with our employees, or are we actually genuinely serious about this and going to make it a substantive involvement? And so those are big questions. Is the potential result worth it? I mean, and this possibly doesn't get asked enough early enough, because involving others comes at a price. Speed of decision making, you know, all the discussions, sense of compromise, sometimes a sense of risk of being associated with others. You know, it needs to be a bigger bet that you're making to make it worthwhile. And then, you know, there's that quote of, you know, typically you go faster alone versus going further together. And it's that trade-off of those two things, co-creation being about a longer term success. Are we really willing to do what it takes? And that might mean, you know, recruiting new people with some different skills, bringing in people that have got experience of working across organizations that are not like ours. You know, maybe more training or some resource reallocation. And then asking the question about other people, you know, are they willing to actually do what it takes? And then finally, kind of like addressing the issue of, you know, which is often the elephant in the room of who's got the power. So starting to actually think about, you know, often the finances, often people with influence, often organizations that have the key to the opportunity basically are the ones in that powerful position, and can dominate, either knowingly or not consciously, dominate the process and the collaboration. And, you know, employees often feel like there is lip service given to their involvement or their consultation. So if you're really serious, there is an awkward but self-selecting process around being able to talk about power. And typically it's the people in power that would have to first acknowledge that situation and help to find a way to balance out that power equation. So that's some sort of generic conceptual ideas, but we wanted to use an example of Supercell. Supercell is a company that we've worked with for 6 years. It's a Finnish video gaming company. You may not have heard of their name, but you've probably heard of Clash of Clans, which is one of Apple's top 5 tablet games, I think probably for 3 or 4 years, that made them sort of famous. Based in Helsinki, but also with locations in San Francisco, Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo. We started working with them in 2013. And we met them when they were really wanting to sort of create a signature giving back program for the company. But when I met them over lunch in San Francisco, basically they had no idea what they really wanted to actually focus on, and that's where the conversation started. So Supercell chose to support an education program called Speed School in Ethiopia and Uganda, and chose that as their giving back program with our help. Speed School is an amazing philanthropic opportunity to get out of school African kids aged between about 8 and 12, caught up 3 grades, grades 1, 2, and 3, in a 10-month period in accelerated learning for a one-off cost of about $180 per child, and then get them placed back into a government primary school in usually grade 4 or maybe grade 5. Local organizations run the program. They train up facilitators that are like teachers and take a class of 30 students that basically have never gone to school, illiterate, innumerate, and chosen on the fact that they are coming from very poor families. They've seen an amazing 95+ success rate of passing those 3 grade exams in 10 months and getting them back into school in government primary schools. Using this sort of group you see the photo, the sort of group active learning sort of and accelerated learning techniques. So the last piece is the sort of working with self-help groups with mothers to actually boost their income so they can afford to keep the children in school when they go back into government school. Really exciting, and Supercell really embraced it.
Thanks, Doug. So now we're going to walk through the phases of building out this program through a co-creation lens, and you're going to hear more about Supercell as we keep going through. But the program that we're talking about is a signature program, sometimes called a flagship program. And these programs typically sit inside your larger citizenship umbrella. They represent a major investment by a company in an issue or geographic region in which the company assumes all or a significant portion of ownership of the program. Now, I'm sure this term or this idea is pretty familiar to most of us on the phone, but the reality is everybody tuning in right now is probably in a really unique situation. So many of you may be running a signature program already or administering one core function of your program. Maybe you are evaluating your program or figuring out how to adjust it if things are changing inside your business, or maybe something else entirely. But the point is that we know not everybody listening right now is in the position of designing a brand new program at this very moment. So what we want to get across is that co-creation and the idea of redesigning as you go from exactly where you are, not just the beginning, is really what makes your program effective and sustainable. So what are the things to look for as you build in reflection points for your program, that idea of redesigning as you go? Well, many companies, and probably some of you included, designed your programs to leverage various components of your company footprint, including leadership, employees, local communities, supply chains, or other assets. But the reality is some of these things are likely to change during the course of your program, which means the reason you created your program, let's say it was to boost employee motivation, may after time not be the issue your program influences anymore. So this is a perfect segue into the formula for actually designing or redesigning your program. Now, our formula has 6 steps. First, determine who needs to be involved and who the program will influence. Second, determine your cause. Third, leverage the appropriate partnership models. Fourth, make sure you have effective structures in place. Fifth, launch internally and externally. And then finally, evaluate. So first up is our stakeholders. Now, typically, stakeholders fit into 1 or 2 broad categories, primary or secondary. Primary are the people that directly benefit from your signature program. So this group may be defined by age, gender, social or economic status, location, or any combination of these factors. And you heard Doug say that with the Supercell example. More than likely, these primary stakeholders have a direct relationship to the company, or there's a emotional connection to the employees. So when we talk about primary stakeholders, we're usually talking about communities. Now, secondary stakeholders represent another group of people who are not necessarily the target of your philanthropic investments, but instead they are influencing those investments, or in one way or another, they're going to be influenced by them. And this is usually employees or leadership, but it can actually also include customers or communities. In some cases, the public may demand action from your company on a cause in which your business is related somehow. But the point here is that the better you know your secondary stakeholders, which are, again, can be all of these groups, the more focused and strategic you can be in identifying your primary stakeholders, who will be the target of your philanthropic investments. So for example, we often use data to understand what causes employees care about. I remember one client I worked with where we were just starting this process. So we're here in phase 1, and I was hoping to look through some Benevity reports and get an idea of where their employees have been giving. And instead, what they gave me was pages and pages of Glassdoor. So the point is that when you're in this first phase, use the mediums that your employees are already using to give you feedback and make way for new opportunities to gather insight. So we often host regional or thematic focus groups during this phase to learn from employees. And Doug will tell us a little bit more about what this looked like for Supercell.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So when we start thinking about stakeholders in a Supercell context, then their primary target audience was their employees. And the most important thing that was that they were trying to achieve was the retention and recruitment of very, very rare tech designers for games, which were in very short supply. They deliberately wanted to make this very accessible to all 5 of their country offices around the world. And they decided that one of the things that they were going to offer were overseas visits to actually go and visit the locations in Ethiopia and Uganda where these programs were actually happening. And then typically they wanted the employees to be the prime communicators of the experience, but also the sense of accomplishment, fulfillment, and what the organization was achieving through this signature program to the rest of the staff. So most of the communication was actually done staff to staff, typically after one of these visits that we were usually organizing about 2 a year. But there were obviously a lot of external co-creators as well. So grantees, the charities that were actually running the programs in the 2 countries, in terms of us as an intermediary, working alongside those grantees, doing the quality assurance and making sure that doing the reporting back and making sure that things are actually happening as they should, and it was staying sort of strategically on target. And also the government, in terms of the government of Ethiopia and Uganda, basically local, regional, and national government connections. So a lot of external co-creators. And then I wanted to pick out leadership because they were a really important stakeholder in all of this. So very much led from the front. So the CEO was the one that felt this, wanted to lead and felt this importance of the idea of giving back as an organization. They also wanted initially confidentiality. So they weren't looking for external public visibility to start off with. They really did care about maximum impact and being able to document the results, both internally and then later externally. And then lastly got interested as this program really took off with the idea of can we create systems change and policy change in the governments in which they were actually interacting with.
Okay, step 2 is defining the issue. So from what we discussed about stakeholders, you can imagine how that phase would directly inform your issue or your cause that you select. But there are other factors to consider outside of your stakeholders, like making sure that your issue tracks to your company purpose and your overall citizenship umbrella, and that it will allow you to meet multiple goals at once, like employee engagement and public goodwill, for example. Your assets could include products that could be used in social programs, but again, they're meant to be, this issue should really exemplify what is unique to your company. And finally, and you'll see this with Speed School, your issue should foster a program that can grow or replicate.
So to take the this sort of first stage of our engagement with Supercell around defining the issue, it was really interesting because they really, most people, most clients come to us with a much clearer idea around what it was that they actually wanted to achieve and which niche they wanted to focus on. But really, honestly, Supercell had only the idea that essentially as a gaming company, they really wanted to focus on children. So we started at that point in 2013 with them. We then moved to zoning down on the issue of we'd like to look at children in Africa and obviously children in high risk or high need situations. So at that point, we then worked up 18 investable opportunities of children working in high risk situations. And just to give you a couple of examples, so we looked at children with disabilities, we looked at orphan care, we looked at boy and girl anti-trafficking within that context. We looked at working with street children, child refugees, and even the issue of sort of child mining, you know, mining open cast and using children as workers, which was very dangerous. We did it in a Shark Tank style. So basically we had lots of short presentations and allowed their management to start to actually react to that. And as you heard, they basically, in the end, chose this outer school children program called Speed School. So we were presenting at the level of the San Francisco general manager, and then took that and presented directly to the full board in Helsinki following that. So in terms of staff, so how did staff get involved? Well, I mean, first of all, there was a lot of employee perspective that was requested through the whole of that sort of process I just described. And that was that internally they ran some focus groups and deliberately tried to actually elicit feedback as we went along. There were 3 mass communication meetings that were all company meetings, you know, one of which in Helsinki that I basically presented at, another that essentially was at a all company offsite, which included the other 4 country offices staff as well. And then later, obviously, it kind of like went to board level and such like. But I mean, there was a lot of debate around the sort of countries in Africa, and it was interesting what concerned people. So one of the things that concerned people was, if we are supporting something in Uganda, does that mean that we're kind of like supporting the anti-homosexual laws in Uganda, or, you know, and we had to sort of deal with some of the ethical issues around that. In terms of speed, they had 2 different priorities. So one really was, we wanted to actually have something to offer where they could actually send employees immediately that the program actually got launched. And that meant that it really needed to be an existing program. So that was the choice of Ethiopia, which was already existing and already been kicked off by some other clients of ours. But they also had this ownership issue, which is that they really wanted to actually do something that meant that they had a unique program, a program of their own that they could own, that they felt like was unique to the company, which meant that we were looking for a new country to take this Speed School program into and create it from scratch. And then that kind of like, in doing that, we then actually started to look at country choices. And again, there was a loop round in terms of staff perspective, as I kind of like said, but we looked at 5 different countries in East Africa, you know, the criteria of English spoken, stable, relatively safe, and eventually Supercell took this choice of choosing Ethiopia because it already existed, and Uganda because that seemed like a good place to actually restart in the north in a conflict zone. So that really then took us on to the next stage of the formula, which is about choosing the implementation model. And there's a number of factors when you start thinking about implementation models that you have to sort of work through when thinking about co-creating a CSR program. And again, you're always thinking internally on the one side and externally on the other. So I start with scale at the top. So, you know, what sort of scale of ambition do you have for your CSR program? And maybe that's starting small and building big, or maybe it's starting big, you know, whatever. So scale of ambition. So, you know, are we really talking about one small project or a couple of small projects in different places, or a programmatic sort of approach, which is larger, or maybe even something that, you know, becomes a fund or basically a collective and is focusing on systems change with some policy and top down and bottom up kind of like initiatives, which gets us to the second top factor, which is really that of ownership. So, you know, how much are we going to control ourselves as a company, and how much are we going to partner with other people? So we could build it and own it totally ourselves, or we could do a hybrid of including others and working alongside others in a sector and geographical sort of target area. So that comes down to our level and tolerance for co-creating with others. Another big factor that has to be sort of defined early on is that issue of how much budget do we have, and how much budget do we think we could commit to for how long a period. I mean, and typically when I'm starting to think about, I always push people to start thinking about at least 3-year sort of conceptual time frames. And if we're really talking about wanting to see long-term sustainable change, talking about, you know, anything up to sort of 10-year periods to really attack some big problem. What type of results are we looking for? You know, some people are looking for lots and lots of numbers of people being affected, but actually often, you know, with not too much of a depth of impact. Or we could be talking about smaller numbers, but massive transformation, as in sort of psychosocial counseling for anti-trafficking or something like that. And then there's the halo effect, which is actually who are you choosing to link up with? Who are you trying to be seen to be associated with? And I mean, the flip side of that is also, who do you not want to be associated with? And so, you know, working through that as an organization is important when you start thinking about working on an implementation model. You know, what type of creativity and vision and originality are you going to go for? All of which usually pushes up risk. So, you know, the cost benefit and the risk analysis is really important at this point. And then finally, one of the things that will start to actually determine your choices are, you know, how much is this issue understood and is a popular issue in your stakeholder group? So that could be your employees. How much, you know, what sense of, with Supercell, we definitely looked at, you know, what really resonated as issues of children and working with children in Africa. But there may be lots of other stakeholders. It could be your customers. It could be essentially your board. It could be the other organizations within the remit of the company, you know. So, you know, how popular is this issue and how well is it understood? I've just got another example here, which is not a Supercell example. This is an example from a financial investment company based in Dubai that we've worked with for about 10 years. And they wanted us to help them create a self-sustaining portfolio of programs. So an idea that essentially they wanted to have innovative projects, small innovative projects running all the time, so that they had the opportunity of picking the best from that and then scaling them up into strategic initiatives, and then possibly even multi-donor funds, and constantly allow this to be a sort of circle, a cycle as their CSR program kind of like evolved. And they got to a point where they created something called the END Fund, END Fund, which is all around neglected tropical diseases. I mean, it started in about 2012, but it's now the private philanthropic fund in the whole of that parasitic and neglected tropical disease world. and has raised about $200 million so far. So you can achieve an awful lot within your CSR portfolio.
So the next step in the formula is choosing the implementation method. And the mechanism that is chosen is often really self-evident. Once you get to the point of defining the issue and the implementation model, all of those things, each component of these potential mechanisms will fit with those programs. So for a corporate foundation, nearly 80% of Fortune 500 companies use a corporate foundation. But even with that, we often see programs being funded through a mix of foundation dollars as well as corporate giving, and even a direct giving program component as well. Some of the benefits here, you have complete ownership, strong branding, but it can also be really costly, require significant staffing and accountability resources. For a corporate founded nonprofit, this mechanism involves creating its very own 501c3 for your work around this issue. It really communicates externally a long-term commitment as well as an internal commitment, given the amount of startup costs there are associated with starting a nonprofit. For a corporate giving program, this allows a company to have complete ownership, and you also have a lot of flexibility in your funding sources. So engagement and communication can be closely tied to the marketing with customer and product initiatives. Sometimes it can be a balance here, though, to appear not self-serving or to diminish the social value that the program is actually bringing through the company's commitment. Third-party nonprofit or intermediary. This route reduces a lot of the time and cost associated with a program launch. It offers a lot of the same benefits as some of these other options, with being able to receive funding through a number of different funding sources, and has a charitable tax benefit to the company. And this is done through the establishment of a donor advised fund or DAF. The last option is a collaborative or a pooled donor fund. This really allows you to take a more systemic approach to the impact within the area, and typically is going to be something you see when you have broad industry report. So Doug mentioned earlier kind of the halo effect, and this really comes into play here especially. There's a really strong association between you and who you want to be associated with in this funding group. This often does require really long-term commitment as well. So Doug, can you share with us a little bit on what Supercell chose as their mechanism and why they chose it? So Supercell chose the mechanism here. They were rather new to the philanthropic space.
Yeah, so sorry about that. So so Supercell, you mentioned that the intermediary was one of the implementation mechanisms. And Supercell in 2013 chose to actually work with us as an intermediary for a number of specific reasons. So one of which was that they were quite new to philanthropy itself, and we're particularly looking for an experienced or global trusted guide that could take them through that process of both learning and evolving. And they particularly wanted someone that was experienced at employee engagement. And they wanted to be able to do that in the field, and had this idea about, taking staff out to Africa, and wanted someone that could manage that as well as help in the corporate office. And then third point really was that they needed help to actually know what the options really were, and then how to navigate them. They also were interested in not an off-the-shelf, but some sort of customized approach in unique markets, in unique places that they felt they could actually own as an organization together. And because of that, they were willing to outsource all but essentially the final decisions and the logistics and the interaction around the employee experience, visits and meetings and everything else. So basically, they were really looking at sort of bottom line at something that actually had, from their perspective, low overhead. They wanted the unique ability to be able to choose their own work, confidentiality, and they needed measurable impact for their shareholders and stakeholders.
Great, thanks. So moving to the next step here, planning for a program launch and sustainability. So when you're looking at launching your program, it's really essential to return to step one and take a look to see that you've ensured that you've engaged your stakeholders up until this point and that they have really strong shared ownership in this launch. Some of the considerations that you're going to think about: budget, what's your total investment in this program? Technology, what systems exist that can help you support a program launch? For example, do you plan on launching an employee giving aspect to your program? Are you going to leverage your existing employee giving platform or matching gift platform? Is there grant making involved? Are you going to leverage your existing grant making system? Leadership must serve as both your internal and your external spokesperson for the program. So here you want to anticipate any challenges you may be experiencing and also think about what other leaders within the organization need to be engaged. Current environment, what else is going on with your company, with your employees, or in the world that may interfere with your message? So right now, if you're in the place where you're looking to launch a program amidst all of the COVID-19, you might be looking to postpone your launch or carrying it into the next few months to see how things go and divert resources there. So your program launch is going to rely heavily on communications and engagement planning. Externally, the level of external promotion that a company will undertake can vary. So this is something that you'll want to really think about prior to the launch. It is becoming more and more essential for companies to address their social impact and contributions to the community in which they work and have a footprint globally. So we do anticipate more of this external piece to be important. When you are communicating externally, being clear on goals, what are your short-term milestones? Share the process that you've taken to get to this point and be authentic about the impact you want to achieve. Internally, here you really want to again carry your stakeholders through this process to launch. Consider their journey and really leverage them as storytellers. If you're going to launch a giving opportunity for different stakeholders groups, whether that be employees, consumers, each of those audiences will have unique messages that you'll want to use, and you'll want to communicate via a variety of different channels, whether that be any kind of internal networking, social networks, peer-to-peer. You'll also want to integrate with other internal initiatives, whether it be your human resources department or an employee or business resource group.
So thanks, Amanda. So the Supercell example around the program launch is really focused internally. Externally, they weren't wanting to actually say very much about it in the first couple of years. I think as they got some sort of sense of confidence about what they were doing and how they wanted to speak about it. So I mentioned most of this. So essentially, one of the things they did was they appointed a part-time lead in Helsinki as a staff member that was going to be responsible for being the point person for us on the philanthropic side. And the last point was that they decided that they needed some sort of random felt fair sort of raffle sort of system for filling the employee sort of visit spots. These were tech people that were very, very busy, and so you know, and also very valuable in terms of their time. So basically, they were actually highly prized. We move on to the last stage in the formula, which is really starting to talk about, okay, so what about evaluation and looking at evaluation and sustainability? So obviously everybody, most corporations actually have some sort of impact report or impact sustainability report. And really there's sort of two lots of information that you need to make sure is coming from the program and baked in early on, because you need, you know, the soft feedback of, you know, pictures, stories, staff videos, and in order to actually put that together internally for sort of print and web and intranet, as well as externally in terms of the different ways in which you communicate to your external stakeholders. But also, you really need all the hard data. So essentially, you know, project metrics, what type of value, cost value data you're getting in terms of how much you're spending for getting in terms of what, you know, what type of effectiveness, what type of comparisons and benchmarking is there out there for you running a out of school program. You know, so for instance, we know that basically we were spending about $100, $180 per child per year for the whole of that program. And, you know, that's not an untypical number in terms of the cost of education per year. So you're starting to actually think about needing to actually set up often a baseline before you start. So many people start a program and then try and do the evaluation at the end and then find that they didn't actually have the before situation. They only are able to talk about the after, and that actually only has half the impact. When we start thinking about adjusting, obviously you're adjusting as you're going along based on the feedback you're getting. And thinking about sustainability, I mean, external sustainability from the charity perspective is we can actually help them in terms of fundraising. We can help them introduce them to other donors. You know, if we're thinking about exiting, we can do some local capacity building. One of the really big, you know, and best exits is basically we've beaten a lot of the need that we set out to actually fight. And you know, government adoption or private sector adoption of that issue is usually, you know, the nirvana for our sector. So what actually happened in terms of Speed School and the results so far from a supercell perspective? So these are the two countries. There's now 220,000 kids that are back in school. 95% of them go back into school after those 10 months, and 83% as of, you know, this moment are still in school. We've done longitudinal studies. We've got academic partners to verify this from a third-party perspective. And, you know, in Ethiopia, we've run over 7,000 classes and put children into over 2,000 government primary schools. And the big win is that the government is now adopting this program and is running 250 classes of their own. We're being the technical consultants as a program to them, and they're talking about really scaling that up. So circling back to the whole topic of co-creation, really as a summary slide, it typically has this internal and external view. So internal, thinking about Supercell was really driving the choice and the implementation of the work. And we've talked about the type of stakeholders, signature themes, how they communicate, reported, and the importance of leadership in terms of both strategy. We took them on a visit last year, and we took all the leadership and their families to actually go and see for themselves what was actually happening in Ethiopia directly. And then there's many others that we're trying to co-create with in order to actually make this actually happen and work. So, so finally, hopefully that's been a helpful, quick scoop through the whole subject of co-creation and corporate social responsibility and creating a program. And now I believe that we got a little bit of time for questions.
Yes, we do. Thanks, Doug. And I have a few here in the queue. So if you have questions, please go ahead and submit them. under the questions tab, and we'll cover them here on the call. So the three I have right now. Doug, how about this? How about you take this one? So has the Speed School program impacted any sales, or maybe do you have any kind of business metrics that you had measured through the Speed School program?
Yeah, as I sort of said, they started off wanting to be shy and not go very public until they sort of built up some confidence of how they could talk about it. And especially in a Finnish culture, you know, there's a lot of cultural issues about how you talk about what the good things you've done as opposed to the US culture. So they were navigating some of those things. They actually started to host and be a big party of hosting a big Finnish tech conference. And they brought their perspective and their learning of philanthropy and mentioning Speed School into that conference, which was essentially lots of the sort of tech peers from around the world coming together. They've talked and done a few sort of sample things about bringing their customers on board, which are the gamers all the way around the world, and at different points actually started to sort of have some in-game purchases that potentially go to one of these programs. So in initially quiet ways, but increasingly with a higher public profile, they found that this really helps them. But I still think that the most important thing is the enthusiasm and the passion and the excitement that their employees have about Supercell itself, working for it, and therefore retention and potential recruitment in a scarce resource sector.
Great, thank you. So another one we have here, and Amanda, why don't you take a stab at this, and then Doug, chime in if you have anything else. But so the question is, our biggest challenge is on leadership. So do you have any good examples or tactics that you can share of seen in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a lot about stakeholders, and we focus on employees because often that group is the loudest. But this is a good question because leadership with one email can change either your issue or your structure, or you may even have to skip or pivot where you are in your design process. And it's something we see a lot. And I think, getting their buy-in up front and making sure that you are creating feedback loops and that they're involved in the stages of redesign. We think that's really important. And then involvement in making sure that their involvement is visible to employees is really important. So you heard Doug mention that the leadership did site visits with Speed School. So that connecting to mission is super important, but also little things like just being present at on-campus events makes a big difference. And we've seen companies be successful in actually showing them that employee engagement, whether it's financial contributions or volunteering, those numbers will go up as the visibility of leadership involvement goes up. And then the other thing I would say is we've also seen a case for increasing your budget or sustaining your program. That case made really successfully to leadership when we can show leadership that employees that are involved in community programs are advancing their skills that will support their job in different ways. So like being involved in an employee resource group or leading maybe a regional volunteer event. There's real leadership skills that are built throughout that. So sometimes we actually see it even taken so far where employee evaluations include employee engagement because that activity is so strongly tied to some of the other things that they're doing in their job.
Yeah, and the thing I'd add would be get your leaders to be involved in the program, because then they come across passionate. So if you can see if there's any way in which, so with Supercell, basically it took us 6 years to get all the leaders to actually go and see the work that they'd been, trumpeting. But what we did have is 2 people that were close to the CEO in different ways had actually seen or came and saw the program and talked about it, and therefore that gave the leadership passion that they were able to communicate to their audience.
Great, thanks Doug and Amanda. So we hope today you felt inspired and a little bit energized to work through this co-creative process with us. As we worked through the examples of Supercell, you probably began thinking through what this looks like at your company. Who are your stakeholders? What issues have you defined? And what considerations are unique to your company? So we'd love to talk to you more about this and schedule a time one-on-one. As we close the webinar, just as a reminder, we do hope you take a minute to provide us some feedback so we can continue to share with you useful resources and host relevant discussions to things that you're facing in your roles. We do have a great blog that features many topics, including the series on co-creation that Doug mentioned earlier. Lastly, maybe a signature program isn't in your cards, but you need help with launching an emergency response or an employee assistance program in light of COVID-19. Or you need to discuss the contingency plan for your current employee giving or volunteerism program. We're here to help and hope to connect with you afterwards. So tomorrow we are hosting a webinar on Global Impact's employee assistance platform. Over the past few weeks, we've seen an unprecedented number of requests for employee assistance program support. And so this webinar, we hope to answer all questions on the capabilities, including how we can support a quick launch and implementation of an employee assistance program to help your staff here in the US and around the world. So thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope you have a safe rest to your week.